Hello and welcome to another episode of Sacktown Talks. Today we have Micah Weinberg joining us from California Forward. Micah, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us. How's it going?
Thanks for having me. Well, it's going pretty good. Actually got to get back out on the road yesterday for the first time.
Wow. How was that?
Made my way down to Fresno from here in Oakland. So that was really great.
Okay, nice. So do you live in Oakland then?
Live in Oakland. We have an office in Sacramento, but at California Forward, we've got folks all over the state because we're truly a statewide organization, and we believe that our solutions need to be rooted in communities, which means we need to be rooted in communities.
Right. For those of us listening and kind of who don't know, can you kind of tell us a little bit about California Forward and kind of the work you guys do?
Sure. So we're a statewide movement to make the economy and government of California work for everyone. We do this in a couple of ways. We do this through our California Stewardship Network, which is a network of collective action of economic development corporations, community foundations, and others that are really focused on advancing social equity, environmental stewardship, and economic opportunity. And we bring it all together through the California Economic Summit, where we have working groups of cross sectors, people bringing people together across parties and regions and others to tackle housing and forest management and workforce development and a bunch of other issues as well.
Yeah, it's kind of, I guess, interesting. All these things are always converging here in California. And kind of a year ago, we thought we were on top of everything. And then, COVID-19 hit and kind of exposed this can of worms. And, yesterday we kind of had that eerie State of the State address with Governor Newsom there in the empty stadium. Kind of, what were some of your takeaways from the State of the State and some of the things that, we should be working on here to make, California a better place to live?
Sure. So he's had a really challenging set of circumstances to deal with as governor. And so I think understandably, the speech really focused on our progress on vaccine distribution.
Right.
And that's certainly a prerequisite to getting other things going. The challenge is there's all kinds of other stuff, crises that didn't go away. So it's raining today, but we're going to have to deal with some substantial wildfires here. We still have a housing crisis in California. The pandemic has really shown how few people have access to high quality and affordable broadband in their homes. And so it's a tough, to be graded essentially on all of these different areas. But I know people were wanting to hear a little bit more about broadband, wanting to hear a little bit more about some of the other issues, perhaps, than they did in the speech.
Yeah, just touching on the broadband issue, that's something that a lot of members that we've had on the show have brought up, kind of this whole broadband for all, internet for all, and kind of this digital divide concept. And, even everyone, no matter what socioeconomic class you are, has been dealing with bad internet here in California. Kind of what are some of your thoughts and California thoughts on how to provide internet for all and how to have a good, stable kind of broadband for all network?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a couple of good pieces of legislation, and I think this is the sort of podcast where I can drop bill numbers, normally.
Definitely.
That sort of thing. But we've been supporting, SB 4 and AB 14. So the bills by Senator Gonzalez and Assemblymember Aguiar-Curry. And we were thrilled when at the California Economic Summit last year, although at the virtual summit, Aguiar-Curry announced that they were going to be co-sponsoring each other's bills. So it's good to see, that cooperation between the Assembly and the Senate on this, because it got a little dicey last year and is still a little bit challenging in terms of the overall cooperation between the two branches. So we're really excited about that, but we're actually also pushing for significant general fund expenditures on broadband infrastructure. And because a lot of our focus has been on, let's get hotspots to people, or, let's provide them with these lower cost plans. But there are lots of areas of the state that don't have the infrastructure to provide high-speed broadband, right? And when you look at it, not to get too technical, but when you begin to look at it at things like 100 megabits per second, there are very few people in the state that actually have access to that, and even fewer people that have affordable access to that. So there are a lot of pieces of this. And we really want to approach this in an all of the above strategy. So it's not, do you extend this particular fee through these pieces of legislation, or do funding through the budget, or get funding and infrastructure from the federal government, right? We actually need all of these things. And, there are different ways of looking at it, but we need about $8 billion, which is real money.
Right. Also
doable for something that is such a high social priority.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. We have this kind of surprise surplus coming out of this kind of COVID crisis of $25 billion. Right. And then we just announced we're getting another $40 billion from the federal government. Kind of, in your opinion, what kind of areas should we be looking to invest that money in?
Yeah, I mean, now we are constrained to some extent through the rainy day fund, essentially. Right. So, we can't spend all of that money, and we shouldn't necessarily spend all of that money this year. However, when we look at spending that money, it's really important to understand that although we have this windfall revenue this year, it's within the context of a growing operating deficit for the state. So if you look just at what's happening with our revenue and what's happening with our expenditures, that gap is getting bigger. So that's why we have to look at significant one-time investments in things like broadband, in things like a topic we haven't touched on yet today, which is forest management, right? To deal with these crazy out of control wildfires. And so that's what we've really been advocating for. We need to be making these sort of fundamental investments, which will really pay dividends in everything from race equity to economic growth.
Yeah, that's just something we just had Senator Wojciechowski on, kind of talked a little bit about forest management, kind of what can we do to kind of prevent these fires? We've had, big fires throughout the last 3-4 years. And every year we think, oh, well, there can't be another one next year because, what is there left to burn? But we keep proving ourselves.
It's a big old state. There's plenty left to burn. And the thing is that you have to, it's only, for less than a decade that these major wildfires even provide kind of, you might call it inoculation against another wildfire in the same area. So if we're counting on the nature just burning things to the ground and then everything will be better, which I know you're not suggesting,
right?
That's not a good plan. So there are a couple of really big things that we need to do in order to do this right. And we have to, we really need to take a page from the folks who lived here in California and manage these forests successfully for tens of thousands of years. And so Bill Tripp of the Carrick tribe is someone who's been a leader of our efforts and really an inspiration to people that are kind of understanding how to do, culturally sort of rooted burning. So, because that's the thing. You actually have to be burning now or you're going to burn later, right? So we're in the rainy season. This is actually the exact time that we need to be doing this. But there are two challenges. One, funding. And so Wojciechowski and others have been deeply involved in coming up with a package. And I know right now they're negotiating it in the Senate and the Assembly. Bigger would be better, but sooner would also be better.
Right.
Would really have loved to have these investments already out in the field. But then the other big challenge here is liability. So, because every, liability is, and various regulatory issues are a pain in the butt here in California, to use a technical term. And we just hosted a big webinar on this with a number of different folks. And unfortunately, we make it almost impossible to do prescribed burns, which means because of various liability issues. There are some good burns happening out there, but it's just extraordinarily difficult to navigate the, sort of environmental regulations and the legal liability and so on. And so we end up, having it be taken care of by wildfire with all of the, damage and death and, chaos that comes as a result of that. And that's really unconscionable. And those are two things that we have known we've needed to do. And it's a real scandal that we haven't done them yet.
Yeah. You kind of mentioned these old methods of taking, care of, the forest and maintaining the forest. But are there any new technology out there that could help kind of us here in the future?
Yeah. I mean, so at this point, because we pursued the really stupid strategy of, fire suppression for 100 years,
right.
we don't have the same forest that we did 100 years ago. And so you do need to do a lot of thinning in addition to controlled burning. And so, yeah, there are various new, types of essentially vehicles that allow us to do the forest thinning as well as the forest burning. There's advances in the use of cellulosic energy, right? So turning that matter into, useful energy. So there's some old school and some new school, I guess you might say. But really, California, like a lot of other states, right? We medicate, educate, and incarcerate, right? And that's what we spend our money on. And that's also what the sort of interest groups have grown up around. And so something like wildfires affects everybody in the state, but it doesn't have the same organized constituency advocating for us to make substantial investments. We'd like to actually see an investment on the order of $1 billion a year for 10 years to get us back to where we need to be. Right now, we're talking about a one-time investment of $500 million. But again, that's better than nothing. But we'd like to see a lot more. And so that's one of the big things we've been pushing for at California Forward. And just quickly, one of the other things is we really work on assembling these coalitions to really change the calculus in Sacramento. So, we do some playing of the standard interest group game inside Sacramento, but mostly what we do at California Forward is an outside game. And so on something like forest management, we bring together some of the conventional stakeholders that have been interested in this, the folks in the Eastern Sierra, the folks in the conservation movement, with business organizations and urban business groups and others in order to create new coalitions to really get these things across the line in Sacramento.
Interesting. A different way of doing it. Something else he kind of touched upon and kind of goes back to, I guess, Governor Newsom's previous states of the states where he's focused on housing and homelessness. We're seeing it more and more on the streets, tents just popping up everywhere in every city across California. They've tried to take care of it with Project Roomkey and some of these other small programs. But I guess, it's just too little and not enough. Kind of what are your thoughts on kind of the state of homelessness here in California? And kind of what are some of the answers you guys are seeing?
Yeah, so I guess the question is, will we ever hit rock bottom as it relates to housing in California? Will we ever have this moment of clarity where we understand homelessness is created by the lack of homes? And if you home someone, they are no longer homeless. Now, there's all kinds of stuff around, certain populations are going to need permanent supportive housing and wraparound services and so on, right? But we're really creating a tremendous mental health crisis, creating people who may not have needed wraparound services, but if somebody loses their home and you're on the street even for months at a time, that can really change your life course in a really significant way. So a lot of this is about homelessness prevention as well as the people that are on the streets currently. And so we've focused a lot on housing stability, right? We've tried to, we put in place eviction moratoriums and so on. We've looked at rent control, but none of that works effectively or works for who you want it to work with without substantial housing production. And we just, we're going backwards on that, And so when we look at a lot of the bills in the legislature this year, even ones that we have, formally supported, we're kind of putting all of the ornaments on the Christmas tree in, the beginning of the year, which is just a way of saying, right? I mean, you've got all these different stakeholders and they want, it needs to all be union labor, it needs to have a very high level of inclusionary, it needs to have all of these environmental reviews and so on and so forth. And so at the end of the day, even if you pass a housing production piece of legislation, it's just words on a piece of paper. Right. It doesn't actually build homes for people. And unfortunately, this year, we appear to have gone into the beginning of the conversation, having totally negotiated away anything that, might happen later in the year. So honestly, we're supportive of a number of these pieces of legislation because we don't think that they're bad ideas, right? We're glad to see, Senator Caballero working on, a piece of legislation, SB 6, to, look at sort of abandoned commercial properties and how to redo that into housing and so on. But none of this, because of the sort of nature of interest group politics in Sacramento, is actually going to produce the millions of homes that we need to make a difference for homelessness, that we need to make a difference for businesses that need high income employees. It's like literally everybody is having a problem with this, but we just haven't hit rock bottom yet, I guess, as a state on this issue.
I think it's interesting. In his first State of the State, he set out a goal of building, X number of homes per year and then millions, right? And, we've had the home builders on before and it's, well short of those goals. As you pointed out, there's interest groups, there's politics involved.
Yeah. I think what we, our sort of fundamental approach at California Forward with our partnerships in our partners in the California Stewardship Network and everybody who works with us on the California Economic Summit, there's no way to thread the interest group needle in Sacramento to get to a good piece of housing legislation. You can't rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic in a slightly different way and not hit the iceberg. We're going to keep hitting the iceberg. And in fact, things are getting worse and worse and less productive, over the course of the past few years in terms of sort of interest group driven housing legislation in Sacramento. And so we try to do a couple of different things. One, we really try to lift up and, accelerate and support all the good things that are happening in the different regions of the state. Everything from, the work being done by, Lift to Rise in the Eastern Coachella Valley to the work being done by Genesis in LA on everything from below market rate housing to accessory dwelling units, right? And there's been some bright spots on the local level. Some of the, the move to re-legalize, multi-unit housing has been very positive in Sacramento and Berkeley and elsewhere. And so that's been more of the bright spots this year have been at the local and regional level. But even that is only a little bit of movement in the right direction. And as long as we are in denial about that, he mentioned 3.5 million homes. That's some work that at California Forward we did with McKinsey and worked with the Newsom administration on that. Unless and until we are producing housing at that level, we will be producing homelessness. We will be producing, there's this whole thing, we can't build homes. Well, we are building homes. Unfortunately, those homes are tents, right? There actually is not a choice, right? Oh, I don't want, this in my backyard. Well, you decide, do you want that in your backyard or do you want a tent in your backyard with someone that doesn't have adequate housing or have safety or shelter or what have you? And we just, we're kind of going in the wrong direction at the statewide level right now in housing.
One thing that this kind of pandemic has done is kind of allowed people to work from home, which then has allowed them not to live so close to work. And you're starting to see people move about the state, moving to areas they normally wouldn't live. You're seeing a lot of people from the Bay Area coming here into Sacramento and, raising housing prices here in Sacramento. Do you see this as kind of, some things you guys work on as regional economics,
Absolutely. I mean, we hear a lot about, we hear a lot about like, what's happening in California, right? Are people leaving California? California is a big place. It's got a lot of different places in it. It's the sort of like arbitrary jurisdictional boundary that squishes together a bunch of regions that are actually, we all love each other. We're all Californians, right? But LA and the Bay Area and the Sierra and Northern California, the Inland Empire, these are all places in their own rights, most of them as large as other states, very distinct from one another. And so, when we had a leader of one of the Bay Area business groups come and speak to his colleagues on the California Stewardship Network about people leaving the Bay Area, our leader from the Inland Empire raised his hand. He's like, yeah, they're coming here, right? So, and actually there's been some analysis recently that at least as it relates to like people and where they're relocating, many more people are relocating within California versus actually leaving the state. But the challenge is there's no supply anywhere. So it's not like there are a crap ton of homes in the Sierras just waiting for people to, come from the Bay Area and occupy them, right? So whether it's, Tahoe or Fresno, even a very small trickle of people moving to these areas is going to have a massive impact on the rental and mortgage markets because there's just no supply anywhere. And those trends, a lot of them are here to stay. I mean, not to the extent that we've seen during the pandemic, but the pandemic has accelerated these trends towards work from home, automation, e-commerce, you name it. And so the challenge becomes, because we look very much at equitable economic development in the regions, we have a great bill carried by Rudy Salas, AB 106, the Regions Rise grant program that we're working on this year. But we need to make these economic transitions in these areas because of how much these trends are accelerating.
You know, and I guess is this work from home trend something that you're seeing that's going to stick? You know, I know these tech companies put a lot of investment and have a big belief in people being around each other and synergizing.
Yeah, you know, I think that this past year has shown that that is not as important. In fact, if anything, I would say that the employees are more ready. You kind of always think about, oh, the employees want to work from home and their employers are insisting they come into the office.
Right.
Almost the opposite. Not that we don't love our children and dogs, but, you know, I know an awful lot of people that are ready to, you know, be working somewhere other than, you know, their basement and, you know, or their bedroom.
Right.
But employers really have looked at the past year and have said, this has actually worked out pretty well. And so I think that we'll see a lot more working from home, a lot more flexible work schedules in the future as a result of the pandemic.
Yeah. You know, another thing you kind of touched on, you kind of brought to my mind is, you know, when things come to loggerheads in Sacramento, nothing's able to get done. You know, California has a unique kind of set of laws that allow, you know, special interests to go direct to the ballot.
Yeah.
You know, we're seeing this, you know, this year with recycling and some other things. You know, what are some of the things that you're hearing about or seeing about that you could, you know, see eventually going to some sort of ballot box fight here in the next few years?
Well, I mean, honestly, there's a potential ballot box fight brewing on housing right now. And, you know, whether, you know, localities pushing back essentially on state overrides to their local zoning authority. Mm-hmm. So that might end up on the ballot. So there's a lot of stuff. I mean, and then unfortunately, that then gets locked into our California Constitution and can only be, you know, changed by another, you know, vote of the voters. And so we end up with this gigantic mess, right, of a government that we cannot reform.
Right.
And so that's why you get these perennial conversations about, should we have a constitutional convention? Is California governable? And so on and so forth. And I think one of the things that's really important to say is that, you know, things like government reform and governance reform, I mean, you know, you can hardly get through the word before people's eyes glaze over, but ultimately they matter a tremendous amount for race equity, and they matter a tremendous amount for economic equity, climate adaptation, you name it. Because you asked me about these trends, right? Mm-hmm. There's going to be more work from home. There's going to be more automation. You know, these regional economies are really changing. We need to adapt for the climate. So it becomes a problem at a certain point that California can't do any of these things, right? People complain about high-speed rail, right? Understandably. But the actual problem is that we don't have a high-speed rail, right? That's the actual problem.
Right.
You know, the project ought to have, you know, been able to be done much more quickly at a much lower expense, but it had all the same problems that we always have. And when you talk to the businesses, you know, our inability to build transit, our inability to build housing, our inability to get anything done or built on any kind of reasonable timeline in California is actually the thing that's hurting businesses, but also hurting people, because it means that our cost of living is much higher. It means that homes aren't available for them. It means they can't move around in order to access the opportunity that exists in this state and elsewhere.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned that. When you brought up the $8 billion for broadband, I was thinking, well, then you have, you know, the Prop 98 fund. So really $8 billion is
right.
much more. And yeah, it just gets complicated when you have to split the pie.
Yeah, and these are not good things to have in our system, right? Like it is, it barely is California barely hangs together from a governance perspective. And then you see how close we are to the edge when something like last year happens. And essentially the legislature, in spite of the efforts of many good people, it completely falls on its face and can't do anything. And, tremendous amount of bad blood from, various things that happened last year and so on. And we need to be, but the thing is that climate change is actually happening. You may have heard, happening pretty quickly. We actually need to update our infrastructure to deal with this. We need to deal with things like lack of broadband access. We need to deal with things like wildfires, and we need to do it in years, not decades. But California only does things on the scale of decades, right? I mean, in terms of you're talking about actually building anything or doing anything. And that's a big challenge. And that, to the extent that, and that's what's causing businesses to leave the state. That's what's causing people to leave the state. We talk about taxes. It's not so much taxes. It's our inability to tackle our major problems on any sort of a reasonable time frame. And regulations have to do with that. Interest group politics have to do with that. But again, when are we going to hit rock bottom on this? Hopefully soon, because we need to change for the people of California.
Yeah. So, we've covered wildfires, broadband, housing, kind of what are some of the other things you guys are working on this year?
Well, I mean, those are really top priorities for us, but it all comes together. And I've mentioned this a little bit throughout, and, the AB 106, but that's just a sort of a legislative vehicle. It all comes about for us, grounding ourselves in racial and economic equity to understand our communities need to be transformed and our communities need to be revitalized. And honestly, a lot of that is going to happen through mobility. So, California focuses a lot on, keeping people in the places that they are, and that's fine. But generally, economic opportunity is a function of moving to other places. And so we need to really make sure that while we're stabilizing people where they are, we're also really providing them economic opportunity to change jobs, to change towns, to make whatever changes they need to make in order to better, their families' sort of multi-generational life course. And so we're really focused on, creating more equitable economies in the state of California, bringing people together, business leaders, community leaders, and others to chart a new path forward and to kind of do it outside of the conventional, set of interest groups and stakeholders.
Yeah.
And you find that when you do that, you can really develop a good set of plans that will both, create more economic equity, but also more economic vibrancy for the business community.
Yeah. You've mentioned the California Economic Summit a few times. Can you tell us a little bit about that and kind of when it's coming up next? Sure.
Come join us, hopefully in person in Monterey in early November.
Okay. Wow.
I think it's reasonable to be somewhat hopeful that by early November, we may be doing at least, sort of hybrid events.
Right.
This is, we bring together, governors and CEOs and various other people. But mainly it's a working summit where the people that are working together right now on either passing pieces of legislation in Sacramento or, implementing different, regional activities across the state really come back together and they check in and they say, like, what have we been up to this year? In all these different areas that we've been talking about, and what should our plan be for the coming year? And then we put out right after that something we call our roadmap to shared prosperity, which is this, plan for taking the state in a different direction on a number of different issues, which we then work on very hard throughout the year.
Oh, awesome. So I guess your roadmap for this year is already out, and is that something our listeners could check out right now?
Our roadmap is out. And we're just super hard at work right now, especially in a lot of the conversations around early budget actions on forest management, and then a number of other budget requests for this coming fiscal year.
Okay, awesome. And I guess if our listeners wanted to check out, some of your work, where can we find you guys online and
cafwd.org? That is the place where we are found online. Please do come and visit us. And that's got all the information you need, how to plug into the Economic Summit, the Stewardship Network, and all of our different policy work.
Okay, awesome. Well, Micah, thanks you so much for joining us. Is there anything else you want to get out there before we go?
No, I think that's good. And, ultimately it was very good to hear, I think we have such high standards for ourselves in California. And I think we do need to step back and reflect on the success that we've had, getting people vaccinated. Everybody that I met with on my trip to Fresno had at least one shot. I haven't yet because I'm not in, one of the categories that's eligible.
Right.
We're making good progress here. And so hopefully within a month, we'll be having a very different, set of experiences. And the work will go on. And I really hope, I guess I'll just end with, we can't take our eye off the ball of economic opportunity. We can't take our eye off the ball of equity. We can't sweep back under the rug some of the things that more people are aware of this year because the situation is sort of more in the news.
Right.
The situation will not become less dire. The pandemic didn't build any homes. The pandemic didn't stop any wildfires. The pandemic didn't help us deal with the economic transitions in our regions. It just accelerated them, right? So we need to stay focused on that in the years to come, even if things get quote unquote better.
Well said. Well said. Well, thank you so much, Micah. We look forward to checking in with you later in the year, and hopefully, we can have some people live at the Economic Summit in November.
I would love it. Please come and be with us. All right. Take care.
Thanks.